learning workshop. This was a really highly demanded workshop, so I'm really happy to be co-leading it with Karen. I know our names say Karen and community of volunteer educators, but my name is Doris. And just going to do a quick introduction of us and then we can get started. So, I have been teaching at like a private organization for about 5 years, 1 year in the DOE, and I am now a master's student in school counseling, and I'm doing my internship as a school counselor. So I have a very extensive educational background, and I'm just now learning how to incorporate social emotional learning. So I'm excited to share what I've learned with you guys as well.
Thanks, Doris. I'm Karen, pronouns she, hers, and I am also getting my master's at Teachers College in bilingual education. And I've been teaching for 3 years overseas in Taiwan and then also in New York City. And I'm learning a lot about social emotional learning. It's definitely a hot topic now, and I'm really glad that Doris has prepared something for us today.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing. And we're going to get started. You will all have an opportunity to kind of share your experiences with social emotional learning as well. So this is our PowerPoint for the day. Today's Monday, October 19th, and the workshop is only going to be about an hour long. It shouldn't take longer than that. It'll actually be a lot less, and then we'll have the floor open for questions at the end. This is also being recorded, so if there's anything that you want to go back to, then know that you can look onto the Google Classroom or Slack or your emails, and then you can look back at the workshop as well. Oops.
All right. So let's first check in with ourselves. Social emotional learning and teaching really starts from within ourselves, right? And so, something that I use a lot with my students and I've seen other teachers use in public school classrooms is this thing called a mood meter. It's divided by colors, as you can see, and it really goes, the colors are supposed to correspond with your feelings. So, as you can see, green is kind of just feeling like grateful, feeling at ease, while yellow is more on the happier spectrum. Blue is maybe feeling a little tired, and then red is where you have stronger feelings that are usually negative. And so I want you all to take a look at this and try to place yourself in one of these boxes. So, how do you feel right now? And I will demonstrate how I have my students respond. So, my students will usually, get a talking piece. So, I'll use this comb. And when it's their turn, they take the talking piece and they say, I'm feeling yellow, eager. Or I've my students say, I'm feeling red frustrated. And this becomes a routine in my classroom. And it's a way to check in with ourselves and let everybody know also how you're feeling. So if you could take a few seconds to think about it, you can also share in the chat box, how are you feeling right now at a 5 p.m. Monday evening? And so Doris is feeling green balanced. Oh, green relaxed for Angelina. Stella, green at ease. And blue tired. Oh, it's a little later in the evening for you, huh, Sarah? Well, think we're happy to have you anyway. Okay, great. So most of us are in the green area. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Okay. All right. So, after a little self reflection, now let's think about how we tie how we feel and what makes us feel good into our own teaching and this concept of social emotional learning. So, table of contents, we're going to first introduce what it is and how it ties in with ourselves. And then, if you didn't get a chance to check Google Classroom or your email, Doris had actually emailed out a great social emotional learning webinar that's an hour long, hosted by an outside organization. And we ask, or we recommend that you skim through it. But if you didn't, that's okay, because we're going to give an overview and talk about the important points in the middle. And then at the end, we'll end with how we can apply these concepts to our own teaching. especially in the virtual classroom. Okay, let's kick it off with a quote. And as I read this quote, I want you to think about what comes to mind when you hear this. Okay, what are you thinking about? What does this remind you of? The attitudes we share with our students are contagious, and they create a deeper connection with our school community in both intended and unintended ways. What does this mean to you? What do you think of? You can type it in the chat box, or you can just unmute your mic and share. What does this mean to you as a teacher?
And just to kick it off, feel free to interrupt me at any time or just type in the chat at any time. We're really good at multitasking here. Attitudes for me has always had such a negative connotation. Whenever I hear someone say to talk about your attitude, I always think about something negative, even though it's a positive and a negative thing. So when I read this quote, the first thing that comes to mind is a negative attitude, right? And think about if you're going into your tutoring sessions or your after school classroom and you're just like pissed, right? Or you're just tired, or you just like hate the class, you don't want to be there. That attitude is going to rub off on your kids, on your either your 2D or the rest of the students. If the parents are there, they're going to notice. Kids are very, very intuitive and they pick up on these things really well. And that's what I also think about when I see the word contagious. So my kids are always really good at like seeing like, Miss Doris, you seem a little bit tired today. You seem a little bit angry today. And it's kind of like a verbal check-in for myself, like, oh, if my kids are noticing that I'm not 100% here, then I need to fix that. So that's what I think about when I read this quote.
Anyone else?
It makes me think about how, like, as the one in charge, your mood sets the mood of others, because they look to you for like how to respond. So if you're not in a good mood or you're not positive about a certain activity, they're gonna mimic that response. So it's important to, like, as you said, like put on, even if you're not always feeling the best, to like kind of put on a little bit of a performative, like good mood, so that becomes the thing that's contagious instead of like a bad mood.
So learning to put something to like leave, we say to leave your personal problems at the door when you're entering like a different space. So definitely just putting it aside for now, like this is not the place for me to, take it out of on who's in here. Let me just leave this aside and I'll come back to it. Definitely.
Yeah. And I see that Sarah typed, regardless of intention, the way we carry ourselves as teachers reflects on our students and everyone around us, whether it be the students or our co-teachers, right? Yeah, that's really great. So I want to emphasize that, teaching is not like you have to be 100% super happy and bubbly, every day that you go in. That's impossible, right? And our students can't be like that either, right? For me, I would say an important part is like acknowledging, like, oh, okay, I feel this way right now, or okay, my student feels this way right now, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but it's how is it going to affect my teaching, or how is my students' mood going to affect their learning, right? Obviously, if you're teaching a 10-year-old and he's really, really frustrated, it's probably going to be a harder task for him to learn something when he's already feeling that way, right? So how can we try to get our students through that, so they can learn their best way? And for us, how can we get through however we're feeling to be, the best teachers we can be? All right, thank you so much for your thoughts. To wrap up this quote, just as our students' identities are a part of everything they learn, how we are and how we feel are also a part of everything we teach. So as we go through this workshop, I want you to think about what were the great things that your favorite teachers did, right? Probably they made you feel really like cared for and made you feel really great. And what specifically did they do and did they say? All right, moving on. So just the introduction about what SEL is. It is it's a process that we apply and learn knowledge, skills, and attitudes to deal with a lot of different things. So the first is developing a healthy identity, so a self thing. Next is to manage our emotions. achieving our goals. So personal, but also classroom goals. Feeling and showing empathy. Establishing, maintaining supportive relationships. Yep, teaching and learning is all about relationships. It's not never in isolation, right? And then making positive, responsible decisions. So this has recently, I think, gotten a lot of hype because we're just in a really difficult time. And people are starting to realize that school is not only a place you learn like math, English, science, and social studies, right? Those are only very small bits of like very large parts of the world. And if you're a teacher that only focuses on content for the whole hour you're with them, and doesn't check in with them, and you don't make them feel like they're cared for, and you like disregard their mood and their identities, chances are your students are not going to learn very well because they're not robots, right? And we're not robots. So these are really important skills that we hope you can begin to think about when you leave this workshop. All right, now that you have an idea of what this field encompasses, could you please either unmute yourself or type in the chat, what are your experiences with social emotional learning? So I'm going to start because my answer is very short. To be honest, when I was in school, I didn't get this. My teachers didn't really do this. It was not a part of the curriculum. You know, we didn't start the day with like mindfulness exercises or check-ins, like mood meters. We didn't do anything like that. It was kind of just like, okay, you learn this and you take the test, and then we move on to the next unit. So that's my experience with it. And how that's affected me as an adult is when I went to college and beyond, it was hard for me to identify my feelings and then know what to do with them in a positive way. What about everyone here?
So I'm still in school. I'm in high school, and I think our like social emotional learning is essentially limited to like advisory at the beginning of the day or the start of classes. They obviously like ask how your weekend was on a Monday, or ask something you're looking forward to, or like assignments you have to do if you're nervous about something, and just kind of a check in at the beginning of class, which is always nice.
Yeah. And still, if I could just ask you a follow-up question, those are like very simple things, like how was your weekend, whatever. Do you like them, / do you think they're effective?
I don't think they're always effective, especially online, because people aren't always the most encouraged to engage. However, I do think it is a nice start to class, as like instead of an abrupt start being like, okay, like open your books or something like that, it's a nice ease in. And if I think students could capitalize more on that opportunity, but I feel like it always opens the door. And even if they don't want to participate in class, it knows like the teacher's willing to meet outside of class if you want to like talk about something you're nervous about or talk about any of your wants. So I feel like, although maybe not like it doesn't seem like it's being used, it shows that like there is a willingness.
Yeah, just setting a culture, right? Anyone else?
I also think for me, when I was in junior high school, I wasn't the best student or child. I was going through a lot. So I had detention a lot. And I really remember this one time I had detention for something. And the detention teacher was, he wasn't like a disciplinary person. He was just kind of there, and he was really chill, and he didn't see anybody who was in detention as a bad kid. And I thought that that was something that's really important because of the way that detention is portrayed, even like on TV and stuff like that. Like the person who's sitting in front of the detention room is like, they don't really care. They're very disconnected. They're just there to collect the money, the procession for the day. And they don't really get to know the students or try to mend the situation. So a lot of the same people are in detention all the time. And for me, when I walked in, he always asked me how I was. And he always asked me, he never like had any assumptions like, oh, you're here because you're a bad kid kind of thing. He just treated me like everybody else. And that was definitely my version of social emotional learning because nobody else in that school cared to check in. Even my teachers who sent me to detention, they just thought that, I was a bad kid, but I was just having a bad day. And all it took was for somebody to ask, like you said, Stella, just to open up the space for me to talk about me having a bad day. Even if I didn't always talk about it with him, it was nice to know that I had the opportunity to speak when I was ready.
Yeah. I like your point about labels, because as much as our schooling system has improved in recent years, gotten more progressive and more caring and more, social emotional, the world still operates very heavily on labels. So if you have a student or students who are seemingly disruptive or disengaged, or they're, when you ask their parents about them, your parents say, oh, they always get in trouble or they're unfocused. I would say there's always a story behind that. There's more to that student than that, right? And we have to recognize that. All right. Thank you for sharing.
So then this brings us to the bulk of our lesson. So what I was hearing a lot of what everybody was saying in the chat, and then with your microphones also, is that a lot of the attitudes that we present start with us, right? Everything that we're doing starts with us. If we are upset or we're having a hard day or we are having difficulty processing something, it's going to affect the way that we're teaching or affect the people around us. So all social emotional teaching and learning is beginning with yourself. That's the first step. And we're going to be talking mostly about that first step. So I can't say that you will actually have any tangible strategies that you will walk away with in terms of using or utilizing social emotional learning in your classroom today. But the purpose of today's workshop is for you to kind of analyze yourself and what you need so that you can become a better educator. And this is definitely something that takes a lot of time. I definitely think that step one is the biggest step. I also think it's the most important step. It's also a lifelong step because you go your entire life learning about yourself. So taking the time to know yourself is very, very important. It will cut down on a lot of concerns and issues in the future. Step two is once you figured out what you need and what's best for you, then you do the same with your students, right? Just like you needed to assess yourself, you need to assess your students and then gauge where they are socially or emotionally. You're going to see that there are a lot of students who need a lot socially, emotionally, and you're going to see that there are students who don't. So your job in teaching social emotional learning is to provide is to first gauge where your students are and then provide the tools that they need to succeed from where they are. So don't assume that everybody knows how to manage their feelings. Don't assume that when a kid is angry, he or she can identify that I'm angry, because sometimes they're not going to know that that's what anger is. Sometimes it might be sadness, sometimes it might be frustration. So you need to figure out where your students are before you can move forward. And then the last step is obviously once you figured out where your kids are, then you find and utilize resources that will best suit their needs. So obviously I wouldn't give a high school student, or I'm sorry, a junior, elementary school student resources to, I don't know, something that's more suitable for a high school student and vice versa. So always meeting where your students, where they are, it's a big teaching point. So I'm going to go back to the quote and back to the attitudes that we share, because again, it begins with us. So we need to talk about how we can assess ourselves. I know that I posted the webinar late, so it's totally fine if you didn't get to watch it. It's also a little bit dry. So I try to take all the meaningful parts of the webinar and then put it into this basic summary. A couple points that they talked about is resilience, which is a big thing, especially in children. Children are extremely, extremely resilient. They can get over and adapt really quickly. So take that to take advantage of that fact and know that if your student is going through some kind of a trauma or something is happening in their life, that all they need is for you to support them, and then they will get over it really quickly. So it's, in addition to them being resilient, it's important to nurture your own resilience, because as we get older, it becomes more difficult to become resilient. We kind of just get comfortable in the space that we are, and we just kind of think that it's okay, and that we don't try to do more with our situation. So it's important to take care of yourself. It's taught and developed. So there's this idea that resilience is like you're just born with it. Some kids or some people are just more resilient than others, which is not true. Students and people are taught to be resilient, and a lot of that comes from having the support. Because if a student has a support system, even if that's just one adult, that's, research shows that all a kid needs is one person in their life to support them. As long as they have that person, then they can begin to learn about resilience. If they have nobody, then they're not going to have that resilience. I said that. And then our body and our mind are intertwined. So this is something that I just learned to practice myself. So hopefully it'll be something that you can also learn to practice. So the webinar talked about the resilient body and the resilient mind. So we're going to begin with the resilient body. The resilient body means practicing your breathing habits, your sleeping habits, your eating, your moving habits, and also having a plan. We also call this some type of a self-care routine. So your breathing habits, something that's important is everybody needs to breathe in order to live, right? But there's something about breathing. There's scientific evidence about taking deep breaths that changes your brain chemistry. So being able to just sit and breathe intentionally and be aware of the inhale and be aware of the exhale, it literally changes your thinking process and it literally helps you to calm down. And one of my favorite breathing exercises is called the 4-7-8, which is where you breathe in for 4 seconds and then you hold it for 7 seconds and then you breathe out for 8 seconds. And it teaches you how to control your breathing. And it also teaches you that you are in control of your breathing. It's not just something that you do mindlessly every day. It's something that you can literally stop and start on commands. Sleeping is another big thing. I guess it's a little bit easier now with the pandemic. I guess it's one of the good things about the pandemic. You save time on commuting in the morning and in the evening. You're literally going from your bed to your desk in less than 2 minutes. So it's a little bit easier to get enough sleep, but keeping in mind that that also means that you're up until 3 o'clock in the morning on Instagram or watching TikToks instead of going to bed at 10 p.m., right? So it's kind of a good give and a take. They talk mainly about pre-bedtime rituals and habits to calm yourself that are really helpful. Something I've always struggled with is not looking at technology for 2 hours before sleep because they say that like the lights are bad for you and stuff and it ruins your sleep and stuff like that. But I literally cannot go to sleep. I sometimes use like Instagram or just scrolling to look at things to help me sleep. And I know that that's a bad thing, but again, you're teaching your body how to be resilient. So you're training basically. Eating is another thing. Your food affects your mood. If you're going to eat mac and cheese for 3 meals a day and then a chocolate cake and then a vanilla shake, then you're not going to be in the best of moods, obviously. That doesn't mean that you should be eating lettuce for the entire day either. I think there's like people find it hard to find a good middle ground. What I really enjoyed about this webinar is that they said to enjoy comfort foods in moderation. So it's not like you can't have a slice of cake, but it's more like don't eat a slice of cake every day kind of thing. So you can still enjoy things, just accept that sometimes you're making mistakes and then you can move forward. And then moving, obviously, physical exercise. I do a lot of yoga. I do yoga 3 times a day. I meditate 5 times a day. So it's a lot of practice again, but once you do the actual practice and then you can start seeing the way that your body is changing and feeling, then you see that it's a lot better. It also sets an example for the little ones. So if you have kids or if you have other children in your house and they see that you are practicing these habits, then they will want to practice it themselves. And then in turn, obviously, we become more resilient and they become more resilient. And lastly, all 4 of these things come with having a plan. So I literally put in times into my day where for these 2 minutes, I'm going to do some mindful breathing. For these 10 minutes, I'm going to have a snack. For this 1 hour, I'm going to do an exercise or something. So set a plan for yourself in the day, set boundaries, set small goals, and then always celebrate every little thing. I'm a counseling intern in a high school right now. And I have a student who has not come to school at all. And yesterday he attended 1 period and his teachers were just complaining about how he's not come to class. But I looked at his attendance and he came to 1 period. I'm sorry, not yesterday, on Friday. He came to 1 period on Friday compared to not coming to anything the entire beginning of the school year. And I messaged him and I said, I saw that you came to period 5 on Friday. I'm really proud of you. You should be really proud. But for his teachers, it was like, all right, he came to 1 class. When is he going to start coming to the rest of his classes? But it's like, you can't expect to make this huge change out of nowhere. So celebrate your small victories. It's really important. All right, enough with me talking about resilience in your body. How can you use these things that we just talked about to build resilience in your body? So you can do this theoretically, like I can breathe more, I can sleep more, or whatever, or you can actually commit to doing one extra thing. So either something that you could do or something that you will do. Which one do you think that you guys can commit yourselves to practice to have a more resilient body?
So I can go.
Mhm.
For me, something I'm working on is celebrating small victories. Um, Interestingly, I tend to do this a lot with my students. Like I'm good at celebrating their small victories, but for myself, I guess I'm harsher, so that's something that's difficult for me.
Mhm. And I think going hand in hand with that, what Sarah just said, setting small goals. It's easier to celebrate small victories if you have small goals.
Right.
Very good. Anything else?
Kind of in line with what Sarah said, but just writing down the goals so then you can like physically check them off with a pen or a pencil
Mhm.
is very satisfying as well. So like literally it's off the list.
Yes. This morning I was thinking about all of the meetings that I need to be a part of this week, and I'm taking on a lot more than I'm supposed to. And I was freaking out because I didn't have a list and I was getting things done, but I had nowhere to check it off of. So I took 2 minutes to stop whatever I was doing and I made the list. And it definitely, like you just said, Stella, the satisfaction of crossing something out is definitely a huge, huge, huge celebration.
For me, usually what I do before I go to sleep, so I have a diffuser in my room. So that's what I usually use with like essential oils and stuff like that. I just been into it like recently and it's been like really helpful, like just doing it like to unwind before you go to bed and stuff like that. Or like if I get like all my work done for the day, like I'm like, all right, I could watch one episode of a show on Netflix or something like that. So like just to like calm me down like right before I go to bed, which has been really awesome because like I know for me, like if I know I have a lot of stuff going on and then like I go to sleep that way, like I would be like so stressed out and things like that. So like it really helps to do like the checklist and stuff. Like I have a bulletin board in my room actually that I use. Like I have little like post-it notes. So like if I have to move things, it's so yeah. So I like move it easily. So then like I like visually like see everything because I am a visual learner. So it makes things a lot easier to just see it rather than having it all in your mind. Cause like you would be like very like overwhelmed and whatnot. Or at least in my experience, I get like super overwhelmed when there's just
Yeah.
too much to do and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I behind me is my October to-do list for everything. And when I did the list in like early October, I was freaking out and I was like, how am I going to get all of this done? And then, a couple weeks went by. Like at the end of October somehow in 2 days. And now half of the stuff on this side of the thing is crossed out and I feel so much better. So I definitely think that it's overwhelming in the beginning, but once you start setting small goals, it starts to become easier. Cause like I'll write something so stupid like got out of bed today and then I'm like check, it's just such a silly thing to do. And yes, it's really important that you reflect on yourself, and now that you know you're a visual learner, you know what that feels like to not have that, right? So think about if you have a student who's a visual learner and you're just doing like a lecture for an entire 40 minutes, you know that that student is not going to learn from that. Awesome. And yes, little victories. I think that also, Angelina, goes into your sleeping routine because I tried to do the candle. I don't have a diffuser. I tried to do candles and I freak out with the fire. I feel like I'm just going to burn my entire house down. So I freak out and that gives me more anxiety. So I stopped with the candle, but I definitely like I have my pre-bedtime ritual where it's like I'll reward myself with a season of a show, not an episode, a season. And that becomes my bedtime ritual. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And then we're going into the resilient mind. So the mind is a little bit harder to control because it's not something that you can physically do, but it's reframing the way that you think. So definitely the first one is letting go, finding strength, understanding that love is healing, understanding that we are now in a new normal, understanding that you should heal in your own way, and also understanding that time has been altered. So this webinar was created in response to COVID. So after the whole thing with COVID happened, people were starting to realize that mental health was becoming a really big issue or concern. So this webinar is tailored specifically to what's happening after COVID kind of thing. So that's what a new normal and time altered are referring to. Letting go just means that there's going to be, as you grow, you're going to notice parts of yourself that didn't work in the past. So in the past, for me, I needed to get all of my work done in one day, and it was impossible for me to just put things aside and just not do it that one day. And I think that that was definitely really bad for me because it was not productive. I was not putting in my best work because I was working so hard. And then at the end of the day, I was just not happy. So I think letting go of the parts of that didn't work for me was definitely a really difficult thing to do. But then it's helped me become more productive, because when I am working now, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put all of it in because I'm only working for this 1 hour today. Finding strength is something that's important. We do this specifically with social support. So when I'm feeling a little bit down, I'll just text a friend or somebody that I know, and I'll just be like, I'm having a horrible day. And then they'll just be there. They'll just be there to listen. And it doesn't even need to be a whole counseling session. It doesn't need to be a whole thing where, like, I don't even need to have a solution. It's just the fact that somebody's there to listen to me for 2 seconds. And especially through COVID, and with online learning, I haven't seen my classmates in a year. I haven't seen my professors at all. It's so hard to build connections. So having social support now is more important for strength than ever. Love, as corny as this may sound, is a very, very healing component. So having someone to love you and loving somebody back, or something or someone back, is a very huge part of helping you. You might have a dog, a cat, a plant, a show, a character in a movie that you love. You don't know how many months Thor has gotten me through, like, midterms and finals. Like, it doesn't even need to be a real person. It doesn't even need to be a physical type of love. It just could be anything that you feel like you're enjoying. You love that thing. Adjusting to a new normal is definitely, we can't go out and have I don't know, go to the movies with our friends for fun anymore, right? That's just not part of our life anymore. So you need to find new things, and that will help you. Healing in your own way is another important thing. I think I assumed that once I was over coronavirus, everybody else should have been over it. And that's obviously a horrible thing to assume, because everybody heals in their own way. Some people are still losing family members and friends from coronavirus, even though I've built antibodies to it, whatever that means. Or like, my family has all gotten the virus and we all got over it. Even though for me it looks different, for other people, they're still losing people. So I think it's important to understand that you might have somebody in your classroom who is going through something, and they just need the time to process it. Unstructured time is also a big, very important thing, especially with kids. Kids cannot function without structure. That's why this whole online learning has become so difficult, because they don't have a physical classroom to go to and move in between. Everything is completely up to them. They can choose to sign on to class. They can choose not to. If their parents aren't at home, there's nobody there to put that on them. And that's also important with yourself, knowing that it's important for you to have structure in this unstructured time. You shouldn't be sending emails on Sunday night at 9 p.m., right? If you were in the actual building, or if you were having your actual job, you wouldn't be doing these things on a weekend, because you wouldn't be there. So there's this assumption that now that we're online, we can kind of all just work all the time, and that's horrible. So it's very, very important to structure your time, and then that way your time that you spend working becomes more purposeful, right? If you're working from 8 to 3, then you're only working from 8 to 3. You're putting all of your energy into 8 to 3, and that's all. And then now, using this information, how will you also, power of pause and making meaning. Again, purposefulness is very important. This basic needs, we always talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the educational fields. We've kind of lost our health, food, shelter, and love here. Shelter, people, there are a lot of people on unemployment. Love, we've lost a lot of people. Same thing with not having the means to get food. And then health is just completely in the dumps with the way that we do healthcare here in America. So it's just a lot of things are happening, and we just need to figure out what we're going to do to help ourselves and our emotional needs, of course. So using all this information, how can you build your mind's resilience now? So we talked about body. How can we do the same with our mind?
Are you asking like how can I take some of these and apply it for
Yeah.
myself,
Yeah.
right? To develop a more resilient mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think for me, because my desk is in my room, that's a really interesting. It's hard because like I sleep here, I do all my work here, I spend all my time here, and like my work and my relax are all like in the same space, and that's kind of complex. So the idea of like physically putting my books away so I can't see them anymore, and like kind of like out of sight, out of mind in a way, is a way that I've been able to like have the space kind of do both purposes in addition, like the idea like that I put school away because if I'm not there anymore, then I'm not going to be doing those certain tasks. And then taking them out when like this is the space that I use for working.
Yeah. And that's such a powerful tool. Tricking your mind into like my books are not in front of me, so I'm not in school. That is a really, really powerful way to build a resilient mind. I think also in the beginning of COVID, I stopped doing work in my bed. I like physically I would never do work in my bed because it was so difficult for me to go to sleep at night. So I would only do work at my desk. And that definitely helped me become a little bit more, it helped become easier for me to sleep, which goes back to the resilient body. Sarah said, working with no structure has made me more proactive with the way I arrange my space and being more forgiving with myself if I don't get everything I wanted to or would normally get done if not for the pandemic. Yes, forgiving yourself is, I think, one of the hardest things to do because you're not getting validation from somebody else. It's not like somebody else is telling you, I forgive you. You need to say it to yourself. And even when you say, I forgive myself to yourself, it's just hard because you know that you know how you are. So I think being able to forgive yourself goes into finding strength and letting go, loving yourself, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah.
I've gotten more conscientious of the things I absorb on social media, and my time, reading the news because that definitely impacts me a lot. And is it's hard for me to like be forgiving and to set boundaries when I see all these things. So being in control of that is helpful for me.
Yeah. And I think in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody's eyes were on the news, right? Everybody was looking at the news, everybody was following the news. And that was a perfect opportunity for the news outlets to start putting things out there to scare people or fake news out there to scare people, even. So I think definitely knowing that you're in control of these things, right? You don't need to watch the news, you can turn the news off. Whatever information is important will get to you eventually. But being in that constant state of like, frustration, confusion. It's just a really high anxiety state. So knowing that you can let that go, definitely. What about, is there anything that you would hope to do more of?
Can you go to the next slide really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I've had to restructure my basic needs part. Just in the like, for example, like readjusting my sleep schedule because I realized that doing what I did before is like just not good. Kind of even needing to restructure the times I eat and what I eat. All of that, and like arranging, my basic living space. I've had to do all of those things, which which helped with, I think, then the more complex things like getting my work done and being productive and making my life meaningful.
Yeah. I definitely think with virtual everything, virtual working, virtual learning, emotional needs become very important. Checking in with someone virtually is not the same as checking in with someone in person. There's something about exchanging physical energy that does something different. So I definitely think something that I've worked on is knowing that, yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's important to get physical contact. It's important to see my friends. You know, you can still social distance and exchange physical energy. I've kept my group really small, so we don't like, you know, to stop the spread. We only hang out with the 5 of us, and we don't go anywhere else, and we only stay at home to do our work. So I think that having that emotional connection is also something that is really important, and we could do that safely. All right, and that brings us to the last half of our, or the end pretty much of our workshop. We want to do, there's not a lot of people here, so I feel like we just stay in the main room. So how can you transfer the information from this webinar to teach social emotional learning? So you know what we're going to do? I'm going to send this in the chat, and then you guys can just write on it. And then Karen and I will just read aloud what you guys are writing. So again, that's how can you transfer the information from the webinar to teach social emotional learning. So I know that we didn't do a lot of like actual classroom application, but now knowing what you know about yourself and how you can benefit better, how can you teach these skills or these strategies to your students or to your prospective students? I know it says breakout room 1 and 2, just let me delete this one. Just wear one. So I put the mood meter here because I've used it with my kids first, and I've seen the value in it. And it works for all ages, all students. You can simplify the language. Keeping in mind that there's a lot going on at home for our students, 1000%. You don't know who they've lost, also, I think is important. There are so many trauma workshops these days because there are people going through trauma. We're all going through the same trauma and the same, like different variations of the same trauma. So definitely just being aware that we're all going through trauma. Setting up checkpoints throughout the class. I love checkpoints. I use checkpoints especially to guide the rest of my lesson. So in the middle, I'll be like, how are we doing? Are we feeling okay? I love, because I do elementary, so I do a lot of thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, thumbs down with how you guys are feeling. And if there's a lot of thumbs up, then I'll move on. If I'm getting a lot of thumbs in the middle or thumbs down, then I'll take a break or we'll go backwards. Goal setting at the end of class, time management, scheduling, hopes, etc. Yeah, I love the hopes thing. Yeah. I think hopes is a great way to bring in the social and the emotional aspect, because it's more than just like, what do you want to learn in the class? But it's like, what hopes do you have? Like, what do you, other than the math or the science or the ELA, what hopes do you have? I like that word, hopes. Saying it out loud cements these goals. Exactly. There's something about using your voice that's different from writing it out. Heal in our own way. When you can tell your student is a little off or glum, take a break to play a game, chat about it. Movement. Yeah, movement breaks are really important. I always tell my kids to stand up and stretch, and we watch each other stretch. So I know that they're doing it. This list of strategies they can choose from, we call this in social emotional learning a toolkit. And what we do in the beginning of the year is we build this toolkit. And then when they're feeling sad or when they're feeling angry or when they're feeling a little bit of some type of way, they'll just pull out what they need from their toolkit. They'll pull out the strategies they need. Providing structure. Structure of the class within the day. Yeah. What are you doing in this class? Some kind of outline of the day. This looks good. And you guys can feel free to add on to it. We're going to post this into the Google Classroom so that everyone can look at these ideas, because I think these are awesome ideas, awesome tangible ideas that we can use. Awesome. Okay. And this brings us back to the mood meter because we love I love to structure my classes with the beginning and middle and end, just like we talked about somewhere on the doc. So let's assess how we are feeling now. It can be the same, it can be different, it can be better, it could be worse. All are accepted. I also encourage my students to, if they don't want to use a mic, they can type in the chat. If they don't want everyone to see, they can private chat me and I won't read theirs publicly. You want to provide options because if I'm being honest, if I'm in class and my professor's like, how are you doing? I don't want to be the one to be like, I'm in a really horrible mood right now. I don't want to be here, especially just to the entire class. So providing the option to private chat is definitely something else the students will feel comfortable with. Green, grateful. Thank you. I love grateful. Being grateful is also a really hard emotion. You
I,
really
I
need to stop. Hmm.
I want to add on to a little bit of what you were saying, Doris, about giving the students for like a private option,
Hmm.
not just like saying how they're feeling. Something that I know a lot of teachers do is like a private journal type of thing where the student can write on like a Google Doc just between you and the student. Um, like a little reflection. It could be once a week or every other day or whenever they want, and then you tell them, "Oh, this is a safe space. Feel free to write how you're feeling, let me know what happened that day."
Hmm.
And no one reads it. I don't show your parents, it's just me and you. And that's worked well for like shyer students or just students who are more introverted.
Yeah, it's helped a lot. I did that when I was doing actual teaching in real life. It helps a lot to tell them I don't even read it. Then they're like, oh, my
Oh,
teacher is not going to read this. So I'm just going to write whatever I want. And, I won't read it unless, I'll skim through it just to see that there's nothing concerning, but they just like to know that they can do something privately. As a kid, you don't have a lot of freedom. You're being watched all the time. So it just, yeah, it helps to know that they can do something privately. Does anybody else want to do a last minute check-in? Green, content. So also the other thing with the mood meter is that people think that the yellow is the most ideal place, but green is actually the most ideal place because you are not ranking high on pleasantness, but low in energy. So you're not using a lot of energy, but you're still in a positive place. Because if you imagine being exhilarated the entire day, how exhausted you would be at the end of the day. So using very little energy and still being fulfilled, balanced is ideal. So I love that everyone is saying that they're green. I don't know if that's because I said that that's ideal or if that's how you're all feeling, but feel very appreciative of that. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our workshop. I'm really glad it's 5:50, so we have 10 minutes for questions. Remember that teaching social emotional learning begins with you. We are all, me and Karen and everybody else at COVE, we are really, really grateful to have had you reach out and come to the workshop. And for everybody else who's watching this after it's been recorded, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. We did start building a social emotional resources doc, I think sometime 2 weeks ago. So take a look at it. It's hyperlinked into this presentation that I will upload onto Google Classroom. So take a look at the social emotional resources. There's two types. There's the types that will help you with you, and then there's things that you can actually utilize in your classroom with your students. And just like the other resources, they're separated by lower, upper, elementary, and junior high school, and high school. So you can find anything that is applicable for you. And this is all of our information in case you guys have any questions or concerns afterwards. You can always let us know.